In this video, we're going to use our financial calculator to solve for our net present value. When we have our net present value, if net present value is greater than 0, we're going to accept the project. If net present value is less than 0, we will reject the project. We will not take that project on. Our NPV is going to be the sum of the discounted cash flows minus the cost. So here we have our first example. Assume it costs $11,000 for a new pizza oven, and you expect the pizza oven to provide $2,000 each year in net income for 8 years. We want to know if you should invest in that pizza oven if you have a required rate of return of 12%, and then we'll calculate some per share data as well. This example is just an annuity of $2,000 payments, so each one of these cash flows is going to occur as an annuity would. And the present value of that annuity can be found either using the formula, and in this case we'll use our cash flow worksheet on our financial calculator. And it's important to note that if you were to solve for the present value of the annuity, that it's not the net present value, that's just the value of those future cash flows. And so here's our formula method. And we're going to use the cash flow register or the cash flow worksheet on our financial calculator in order to solve this problem. Here you see our inputs. And the first thing I'm going to do is select the CF button. And you'll see that that pulls up CF0. And in this case, that 0 is going to indicate that it's a cash flow today. That's a cash flow at time 0. And so for this value, if we're going to pay for something today, if the cost is today, we're going to have to pay for that up front. And so we need to type in our 11,000, then hit our plus or minus key. And so I'll hit 11,000, then hit plus or minus. And then I'll hit our enter button. Enter and equals are not the same thing. And that little arrow pointing to the left tells us that it's saved in our worksheet. You'll notice here that we have a C01, and so what we're going to do is hit the down arrow in order to get to that. That's going to be our cash flow at time 1, and so we're going to type in $2,000 there. So I'll type in 2,000 and hit enter. Enter and equals are not the same thing. And so our cash flow at time 1 is 2,000. This F stands for frequency. And in this case, there's one 2,000 payment for our first cash flow. And we'll talk about that frequency here in a little bit. I'm going to hit the down arrow again to get to our cash flow at time 2. It's also going to be $2,000, so I'll type in 2,000. Then hit enter, so it stores in as a cash flow at time 2. I'll hit the down arrow again. And then we'll see our frequency of the cash flow that occurs at time 2, and its default is 1, and we'll leave it that way. Our cash flow at time 3 is going to be 2,000, and so are the remaining cash flows, so I'll enter those now. And here we have our last cash flow at time 8. Its frequency is also 1. I want to make sure that the next cash flow is 0. And then it will go back to our cash flow at time 0. So now we have this information, and we need to use the NPV key. Our NPV key is located just to the right of our cash flow key. And when I select it, it pulls up an I for our interest rate, and here we're going to use our required rate of return or our discount rate of 12%, so I'm going to type in 12. Just like many other functions in our calculator, we don't need to use it as a decimal, I can type in that whole number. So I'll type in 12 and then hit enter. Then I'll hit the down arrow to get to our NPV. And I want to compute that, so I'll hit CPT. And here we see our net present value of a negative $1,064.72. In this case, our cash flow register has a pretty important power that we can use with it. And we can take advantage of that frequency for each one of the cash flows to make this process a little bit shorter. And so instead, what we might do is use that frequency in this manner. And I'm going to clear out the cash flow worksheet. And the first thing I'm going to do is hit second and then clear work, or our clear key down at the bottom. And that'll clear out our interest rate. And then I'll move to the cash flow worksheet and clear it out as well by hitting second and clear. And if I want to start over, we could type in that same cash flow at time 0, which is going to be our cost of $11,000. And I need to make that a negative value, right? It's a cash outflow. I need to make it a negative value, so I hit the plus or minus key and then hit enter. If I go to the cash flow at time 1, again, I could type in this $2,000 and then hit enter. And here I can use this frequency to our advantage. So we notice that we have 8 of these cash flows that are the same. At the end of years 1 through 8, all of the cash flows are $2,000. The frequency of that cash flow is going to happen 8 times. So what I could do is just type in 8 here and hit enter. Make sure that our other cash flows are 0. Go to our NPV key and type in 12 and enter for our I. Hit the down arrow to get to NPV, and then hit compute. And you'll see we have that same NPV. In this case, that frequency key was relatively straightforward because we had an annuity. In some cases, if you're using that, you need to be mindful of when the cash flows occur, how many occur, and when there's a change. So in this case, if those middle 2 cash flows, if the cash flows at time 4 and 5 were say $8,000, I could type in 2,000 for cash flow 1 with the frequency of 3. Cash flow 2 would be 8,000 with the frequency of 2. And cash flow 3 would be 2,000 with the frequency of 3. And so if you're going to use that method, you need to be mindful of that process and make sure that you're using it correctly. In this case, we found that our net present value was a negative $1,064.72. If we have 5,000 shares, we simply divide negative 1,064 by 5,000, and that gives us a negative 0.212944 per share. Our second example is going to have unequal cash flows. And we need to discount each one of these cash flows back to today individually. If we were using the formula method, this would be the process. In this case, though, if we're using our calculator, there's a different method to do that. And so first, we're going to complete the cash flow worksheet or the cash flow register. Then we'll select NPV and make sure our interest rate is 11%. And then we'll solve for our NPV. And so the first thing I'll do is clear these values out. We want to make sure we do that anytime we're working with a register or worksheet. So I'll press the cash flow button or the CF button and then hit second and clear to clear the work. And then I'll type in our cost at time 0 for 6,500, and then I'll hit plus minus. And then we hit enter to store it. Enter and equals are not the same thing. Our cash flow at time 1 is $1,000 and it occurs once. So I type in 1,000 and then hit enter to store it as cash flow at time 1. Hit the down arrow and then our frequency is going to be 1 for cash flow of 1, and that's the default, so we can leave that alone. I'll hit the down arrow to go to cash flow at time 2. And it's $2,000, so I'll type in 2,000, then hit enter. And again, we'll know that it's stored because the arrow that displays. I'm going to continue with our cash flows at time 3 and 4, which are 3,000 and 4,000 respectively, with a frequency of 1 for both of them. Then I'm going to select our NPV button. I'm going to type in our interest rate of 11%, but I'm not going to use it as a decimal. It's only going to be 11. Then hit enter. Then the down arrow. And then I'll hit compute to compute our NPV. And what we see here is that we have an NPV of positive $852.64. Again, our NPV was a positive $852.64. If we assume that this firm has 500 shares of stock, we could just take our $852.64 and divide it by 500. You'll notice that that will give us $1 per share of 1.70528. And so we would expect that we would add about $1.705 per share by taking on this project.